Christmas dinner smelled like rosemary, lamb, and betrayal. My son Darren stood up, raised his glass, and cut through the chatter like a blade. "Dad, you're no longer part of this family. Get out of this house." The room froze. Sienna, his wife, smiled barely. My relatives stared. And I just sat there. No reaction, no words. Just a calm nod. I slid an envelope across the table. "Here's your gift, son." He opened it and screamed. The table was silent, stunned. That was the sound of my revenge. Just beginning. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are listening from today. It didn't feel real at first. The lights on the tree still twinkled. The rosemary scent still clung to the lamb chops. But the warmth in the room had vanished. All that remained was cold calculation and the brittle edge of something broken, something that wasn't going to be put back together this time. I didn't look at him. I looked past him at the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away the final moments of my silence. 3 months ago, I was the rock of this house. That's what Darren used to say in his childhood speeches. I was the man who fixed the roof when storms ripped it open. The one who worked double shifts so he could get Brace's college and a first car. My late wife Margaret used to say I gave too much. One day, Arthur, she'd say, "Folding the laundry, you'll give so much of yourself you won't recognize what's left." I used to think that was poetic. Turns out it was prophecy. After she passed, the house got quiet. Too quiet. Darren moved back in temporarily after grad school. Then came Sienna, sharp-tongued, ambitious, polite in public, but always measuring space, measuring control, measuring how much longer I'd be around. It started with harmless suggestions. "We should modernize the kitchen. These curtains are kind of dated, Arthur. This place needs fresh energy." I didn't argue. I nodded. I let them repaint the walls I loved, replace furniture I'd repaired with my own hands. I let them take the master bedroom. After all, I had the study. I liked the quiet, but quiet doesn't mean blind. About a year ago, I noticed they'd stopped asking if I wanted to join them for dinner. They'd just eat early or late, or order in something I wasn't invited to share. Sienna once smiled and said, "We figured you'd already eaten." I hadn't. Then came the finances. Darren asked to merge a few expenses onto one shared account just for simplicity. He'd take care of the bills, he said. "Let me give back to you, Dad." I smiled. Trusted him. Signed where he pointed. But it was Sienna who made the real decisions. She was the one who installed a Ring camera I never asked for, who brought in a realtor just to assess the market, who told relatives over wine that Arthur's not part of the plan, but we're doing our best to include him. I heard that last one from my cousin Ben, at a funeral. Ben pulled me aside and said, "Arthur, are you okay?" Sienna said you were thinking of moving into assisted living, that you wanted to give them the house. I stared at him. My fork paused mid-slice. I was cutting roast chicken at the time. I said that I asked. He looked away. "She made it sound like it was your idea." That was the moment I knew. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were writing the eulogy early. I didn't yell. I didn't even confront Darren. I just got up the next morning, walked into the garage, and opened the drawer where I kept old manuals and mortgage files. And I read. Every single page. What did I find? Let's just say Darren wasn't as detail-oriented as he thought. He'd never removed my name from the deed. He'd never closed the original account we used to pay property taxes. And most interestingly of all, he'd never changed the title on the 401k savings account I'd opened for emergencies. I'd opened that account when Margaret was first diagnosed. I never touched it. He thought I'd forgotten it existed. I didn't forget. I was waiting for them to be careless enough to show their hand, and they did beautifully. The real catalyst came 3 weeks before Christmas. I was in the kitchen late at night, couldn't sleep, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, heard whispering down the hallway, Sienna's voice. "Once he's out, we can remodel and refinance. That'll fund the move to LA. We'll finally be free." Darren mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then the unmistakable sound of a high five and laughter. They were already spending the proceeds. That night, I installed a second camera, my own, hidden in a light fixture, audio only, clean, crisp, undetectable. And the next morning I called Victor. Victor Sloan and I go back 40 years. We built bridges together. I mean that literally. We were engineers. But after a workplace injury sidelined him, he went to law school, specialized in estate law and property trusts. Smart guy, loyal, the kind of man who drinks black coffee and remembers your wedding anniversary even after your spouse is gone. I was wondering when you'd call, he said when he picked up. You always were too patient for your good. I'm done being patient, I said. What followed were 3 weeks of planning, legal documents, trust accounts, revocation letters, account freezes, and one beautiful, devastating letter sealed in cream-colored stationery with no return address. I didn't tell anyone, not even Linda, my sister. I just played the part, polite, quiet, invisible, until Christmas. The tree was up, music playing, relatives gathered. Sienna had insisted on hosting the family dinner this year, her first time taking over from me. You've done enough, Arthur, she'd said, voice honeyed. Let us take care of everything. I was seated near the end of the table next to the wall where Margaret's portrait used to hang. They'd replaced it with abstract art, gray, white, and beige. It looked like someone had smeared dust on a napkin and framed it. Still, I smiled, chewed politely, watched, and then Darren stood, raised his glass, and said it. Dad, you're no longer part of this family. Get out of this house. I didn't blink. Sienna glanced around, testing the reaction. The table fell silent. Cousin George dropped his fork. My niece Harper let out a short, nervous laugh, then covered her mouth. I didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't ask why. Instead, I reached under the table, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it toward Darren with a small, steady smile. Here's your gift, son. He scoffed. Tore it open. Read the first page, then the second, then the third. His hands started to tremble. What is this? He hissed. Sienna leaned over, took one look, froze, then said barely audible, "Oh my God." Everyone stared, but no one spoke. Because sometimes, silence is the most deafening sound in a room, especially when it's the sound of a kingdom crumbling. I didn't sleep that night. After the dinner, after the envelope, the scream, and the stunned silence, I drove back to the apartment I'd rented under a pseudonym. Small place, just a chair, a lamp, and a desk, a cot in the corner. My name wasn't even on the lease. I sat by the window looking out at the street below. There was still snow on the curb melting into slush. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Not even angry. Just emptied. Because long before I ever drafted legal notices or froze accounts, I had to sit with one truth. Darren had changed, and I had helped him become the man who now wanted me gone. He wasn't always like this. There was a time he couldn't sleep unless I left the hallway light on. He'd pad into the kitchen in Superman pajamas, dragging a tattered blue blanket behind him. I'd lift him onto the counter, hand him a cookie, and listen to his latest theory about dinosaurs or pirates or time travel. There was a time he'd build Lego bridges and call them Dad's job, a time he cried when I left for business trips, a time he stood on stage at his high school graduation, voice shaking, and said, "Everything I've become is because of you, Dad." I remember that boy, and I remember the man who sat across from me 4 weeks ago, folding his arms and saying, "This house is wasted on you." It started subtly. Sienna didn't move in right away after they married. First it was weekend stays, then weekday sleepovers. Then her plants showed up on the kitchen counter, then her shoes were in the foyer, then her opinions are in the air. She was good at suggestions. That's what made her dangerous. The first time she suggested they handle the bills just to relieve the pressure, I said yes. She smiled like she was doing me a favor. I didn't realize the cable bill had been rerouted until the TV blacked out during a Sunday game. I called support. They asked for the name on the account. "Arthur Grant," I said. There was a pause. "No record of that name, sir," the rep replied. It was now under Darren's. That night I stayed awake. Something had shifted, not with a bang, but a quiet reordering, and I'd let it happen. I started looking, quietly. One afternoon they left for a weekend in Asheville, a wellness retreat Sienna called it. I stayed behind, said I was coming down with something. They didn't protest. The moment their car backed out of the driveway, I went to the drawer in the study, my drawer. Buried under warranty manuals and old birthday cards was a thin folder marked Mortgage 2001. I spread everything out on the dining table. The same table where Darren had built his science fair volcano. The same table where we'd carved pumpkins. Now it was a war room. Step 1. Paper trail. I found the original deed. My name, Arthur James Grant, sole owner. But beside it, a refinance document I didn't recognize. Darren's name had been added 5 years ago during the time I was in and out of the hospital with my sciatica. I scanned the signature. It looked like mine, but I didn't remember signing it. I kept going, found joint bank statements. Dozens of small withdrawals, $49.99, $129.45, a $600 charge to something called Clever Nest Interiors. One line item read, Pet Psychic Consultation. I laughed, bitterly. They were using my savings to consult with someone who reads cats. Then I found it. An online banking profile was still logged in on Darren's old laptop. He was careless. They'd created a house account meant for shared expenses. But in reality, it was a siphon. I saw it all. Transfers to personal Venmo accounts. Payments for spa days. A $2,700 charge to a luxury rug boutique. All from my funds. I took photos of every screen, every document, printed what I could, stored them in a fireproof folder. My hands shook when I zipped it shut. It wasn't about the money, it was about the narrative they were writing without me. Step 2. Recording. A week later, I installed a tiny audio recorder inside the recessed light fixture in the kitchen ceiling. It activated on sound, stored everything in encrypted files. I tested it myself, whispered lines, clapped, even coughed. It worked. And then I waited. They were careless with their cruelty. People like that usually are. First recording, November 28th, 10:37 p.m. Sienna. Once he's out, we tear down that wall. Open floor plan, maybe extend the deck. Darren. Do we even need his consent, Sienna? The man's almost 70. We'll say it's for his safety. Second recording, December 5th, 11:12 p.m. Sienna. He's still breathing down my neck about that dumb mailbox. Darren. He loves that thing. Painted it with Mom. Sienna. Then maybe he should go live in it. They laughed. I didn't. Step 3. The will. Victor and I met at a diner out by Route 19. He ordered black coffee. I brought a briefcase full of printouts. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Do you want them out, or do you want them undone?" "Both," I said. So we started. We rewrote my will. Everything to a local nonprofit literacy foundation. We closed old accounts, froze access. We created a property trust, putting the house in a new structure only I controlled. And we drafted a legal eviction notice time-stamped to Christmas Day. Victor reviewed each document twice. His red pen danced over the margins. "You sure about this?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. A boy walked by holding his father's hand. The father leaned down to say something, maybe a joke. The boy laughed so hard his steps bounced. I remembered walking like that with Darren. He used to think my arms were strong enough to carry the world. I turned back to Victor. I was sure when I heard my son ask if I was legally competent to own property. Victor nodded. "Then let's cut the line, clean and sharp." Back at the house, I kept playing the role. Quiet, polite, obsolete. But every time I walked past the kitchen, I looked up at that light fixture, and I smiled. Because while they were plotting their future, I was recording their downfall. I first heard about the Christmas dinner from Linda, my sister. "Arthur," she said over the phone, trying to sound casual, "I heard Sienna's planning something big for Christmas Eve. She's inviting the whole family. Aunts, cousins, even the bakers from across the street." I blinked, letting that sink in. "Really," I said, stirring the tea I wasn't going to drink. "Funny, I live in that house. No one mentioned it to me." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Linda's breathing, unsure whether to continue, but she did. She also told Aunt Joyce that you've been confused lately, that you've been forgetting things, that you might be ready for assisted living. I didn't answer, because I wasn't shocked. I was prepared. They were finally going to do it. The performance. Everything they'd plotted behind closed doors, now it was going public. And they'd chosen Christmas Eve of all days. How poetic. Sienna was smart. She understood optics. A room full of extended family, holiday cheer, and emotional language. Dad's not himself anymore. We're just looking out for his safety. He's holding on to things he can't manage. They weren't just trying to push me out. They wanted the audience to clap while they did it. But the one thing they forgot, I built that house. And I knew every inch of it, every secret drawer, every echo, every line of the foundation. So if they wanted to set the stage, fine. Let them. I'd give them the lights, the guests, the timing. But I'd write the final scene. I spent the next 2 days in what I now call the war room, my apartment. I laid out everything. The folder was full, nearly bursting now. The bank statements with Darren's spending trail. The audio files meticulously transcribed and labeled by time and date. The screenshots of Venmo transfers between Sienna and her sister with messages like, "when he's finally gone." The property trust documentation that removed Darren's legal claim on the house. The eviction notice dated December 25th, printed on ivory legal-grade paper. I didn't sleep. I sharpened. Victor called to check in. Still on track. Yes. Good. Just remember they'll try to spin this. I'm not worried about spin, I said. I have receipts, and the room will see them. He paused. Arthur, this isn't just legal. This is personal. Are you sure you want to go through with it like this? I didn't write the first line of this story, I said. But I'm damn sure writing the last. December 20th. I returned to the house with a bottle of scotch and a story about wanting to make peace before Christmas. Darren played the part, awkward smile, stiff hug. Sienna barely looked up from her laptop, but she offered me a plate of reheated pasta. Progress. Excited for the big dinner, I asked, feigning casual interest. Sienna tilted her head. Who told you I smiled? Linda mentioned something. Big crowd. She shrugged. Not too big, just family. Thought we'd do something nice. You know, since everything's been tense. I nodded. I think it's a lovely idea, I said. And she smiled, so sure of her control. I spent the next 2 nights moving carefully, quietly. When Darren was out and Sienna was in the bath, I slipped into the study and switched the framed photo of them on the bookshelf with a folder identical to mine. A decoy, a red herring. Mine, the real one, was hidden beneath the baseboard in the guest room closet. There was a loose panel Margaret and I had installed years ago, just big enough to tuck in emergency cash or documents. Fitting, I thought, that the final blow would be delivered from the one room in the house they never used, because it held nothing Instagram-worthy. December 24th. Christmas Eve. The house was alive with activity. String lights twinkled. A candle with notes of cinnamon and pine burned on the entry table. Platters of food appeared in waves, stuffed mushrooms, honey ham, that rosemary lamb Sienna insisted on serving each year. The table was long and white, draped in linen. My wife's china was set out like ceremonial relics, but the warmth was gone. It was just props now. I watched the guests trickle in. Aunt Joyce, Cousin Tom, and his wife Bernice. Even the bakers, as promised, showed up with a bottle of store-bought wine and polite smiles. I wore a dark navy blazer pressed shirt and the silver tie pin Margaret had given me on our 25th anniversary. I looked like the ghost of someone they all used to know. At 7:15 p.m., the room was full. The fire crackled. Laughter floated around the room like perfume. Darren stood, glass in hand, smile a little too bright. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he called out, tapping his glass with a fork. The room hushed. I sat motionless, hands folded in my lap, a small envelope tucked under my chair. Sienna placed a hand on Darren's arm, eyes gleaming. "Thank you all for coming," Darren began. "Tonight's about family, about care, and about making sure our loved ones are looked after." I could feel it coming. Some of you may have noticed my father's been not quite himself this past year. Soft gasps. Eyes on me. I didn't blink. He's been forgetful, disoriented, sometimes confused. And that's okay, it's part of aging. But we wanted to share some difficult news. He took a breath. We've begun the process of assuming guardianship just to make sure things are handled responsibly, financially, legally. Sienna chimed in sweetly. It's not about control, it's about love. I stood. Chairs shifted. Forks clinked. Before you finish that toast, I said I'd like to offer a gift of my own. I reached under the chair and pulled out the envelope. Sienna's smile faltered. Darren raised an eyebrow. I stepped forward, laying the envelope on the table between the rosemary lamb and the holiday centerpiece. He picked it up, opened it, and froze. Sienna leaned in, read, and went pale. It was the eviction notice on top, followed by the trust papers, then the itemized list of misused funds, and finally, the transcript. Complete. Word for word. Every conversation they thought was behind closed doors. The guests murmured. Joyce stood up. "What is this?" Darren tried to speak. Couldn't. His throat worked, but no sound came out. Sienna's lips parted, then closed. She reached for a napkin, dabbing invisible sweat. "It's a mistake," she said. "A cruel prank." I pulled out a small remote, clicked it once. A speaker crackled. And then, Sienna's voice. "When he's finally out, we flip it. Quick Reno. List it by spring." Darren's voice. "You think he'll fight back, Sienna? No. He's old. He won't even see it coming." The room went still. Bernice gasped. Tom stared at Darren like he'd never seen him before. I looked around slowly. My voice is even. "You wanted a spectacle, so I gave you one. But unlike your script, mine came with fax notarized documents and federal timestamps." Sienna stammered. You bugged the house. I protected it," I said. "From both of you." Darren finally snapped. "You had no right. I had every right," I said, voice cold. "You tried to strip me of my life while smiling over a lamb roast. That house isn't yours. Not legally, not financially, not morally." They had no rebuttal. Only shame. Some guests left, quietly, embarrassed. Others stayed watching the scene unfold with wide eyes and clenched jaws. Linda stepped forward. "Arthur, I'm sorry. I should have seen it." I nodded. They counted on everyone looking the other way, but not anymore. Darren dropped the envelope. Papers spilled across the table like fallen snow. "I'll fight this," he said, but it sounded hollow. I said, "I welcome it." I walked to the doorway, turned once, and looked back at the room. At Sienna, clutching Darren's sleeve, mascara was bleeding into the lines of her rage. At the guests who once thought of me as a quiet, harmless man. And I smiled, not in triumph, but in clarity. They wanted a stage, but I owned the theater. I didn't slam the door when I left, didn't even pull it hard, just closed it. Quiet, clean, final. The sound echoed behind me, muted by snow, but sharp in my chest. It was the sound of a house exhaling a truth it had held too long. I stepped onto the porch, the cold slicing through my wool coat, and stood for a moment under the flicker of the porch light. It buzzed softly. Always had. Darren was supposed to fix it. He never did. Behind me, the dining room was chaos. I could still hear the murmurs through the walls. Sienna's voice sharp slicing. Darren, desperate now, was trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. The relatives were speaking louder than before, but not to defend him. Not anymore. They weren't just stunned, they were ashamed. Ashamed that they believed him. I walked down the driveway slowly, boots crunching over old snow and new silence. A neighbor's inflatable reindeer lay half deflated on the lawn, its head lolling sideways like it too had seen too much this season. Halfway down the street, my phone buzzed. Linda. I stopped. Let it ring. She called again. Then came the message. "Arthur, I had no idea, I swear. I'm so sorry." I pocketed the phone. Not because I was angry at her, I wasn't. But apologies are heavy things. And I already had enough weight to carry tonight. When I got back to the apartment, I turned off all the lights except the one on the desk. The folder lay open, its pages no longer a weapon, just evidence now. Cold, factual, finished. I sat down, pulled off my gloves, and stared at the photo of Margaret beside the lamp. She was smiling in that picture, head tilted, slightly curls, brushing her cheek, eyes full of warmth. It was taken the year we renovated the porch. Darren was 12. She had paint on her hands. I whispered, "It's done." But the quiet that followed didn't feel victorious. It felt hollow. I didn't sleep that night. Again. At around 2 a.m., I stood by the window and watched the snowfall thicken. A delivery truck rolled past, its tires hissing on wet pavement. I thought about what Darren looked like when he was 5. His cheeks were red from sledding, how he once cried because he lost a snow globe I gave him, said he missed the world inside it, and now he wanted me erased from his. The next morning I made a pot of coffee, black, bitter, strong, just the way Victor used to drink it. I sent him a single text. "It's done. Thank you." He replied a minute later. "They'll try to spin it. Be ready." I was. By noon, the first ripple came. Voicemail number 1. Aunt Joyce. Her voice was thin, like she wasn't sure she should be calling. "Arthur, I don't know what to say. I believe Darren. I did. But after what you showed us, I'm sorry. If you ever want to come for Sunday supper again, you'd be welcome. Always." Voicemail number 2. Cousin Tom. More direct. "Hell of a move, Arthur. Never seen someone take a punch and return it with documents. Damn proud of you. You need help moving, you call me." Voicemail number 3. Darren. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. The transcript of his message was enough. "Dad, can we talk? Not like legal talk. Just talk. Please." I let it sit. By evening, the group photo from the night before, the one Sienna posted to Instagram with the caption, "Family is everything," was gone. Deleted. Comments had started appearing beneath it, I was told. Little things, quiet questions. Was that before or after the eviction notice? Wow. What a night. A house of curated perfection was crumbling one post at a time. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Not a text, not an email, a real ink-on-paper letter. From Sienna. I opened it with a steak knife. Sat down. Read. "Arthur, I want to say I'm sorry, but I don't think that's what you want. I know I hurt you. I know we went too far. I thought I was protecting Darren's future, our future. I didn't realize I was destroying yours. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll believe that it wasn't all cruelty. Some of it was fear. Sincerely, Sienna Fear." That was the most honest thing she'd ever written. But fear doesn't undo betrayal, and regret doesn't rebuild trust. So I drafted my response. Didn't send it. Just needed to write it. "Sienna, I once thought silence was strength, that if I kept the peace long enough, people would remember who I was. But I learned something. Silence isn't peace. It's erasure. You didn't want a father-in-law. You wanted a placeholder. I was never your obstacle. I was the foundation. You built your plans on my back, and when I stood up, they collapsed. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm done carrying you." I folded it, slid it into the back of the desk drawer. It was never for her. It was for me. That Friday, I met Victor for lunch. He brought a bottle of Glenfiddich and a crooked grin. "Well," he said, "settling into the booth, you made local gossip, my friend." "Oh, ran into a guy from Rotary." He said, "You hear what Arthur Grant pulled on Christmas Eve?" I said no, but I bet it was elegant. We laughed. It felt real. Victor leaned back. "You thinking about keeping the house?" I shook my head. I thought I would. But it's not mine anymore. Not really. Every corner's got echoes I don't want to chase. Then I looked out the window at the busy street. I sell it. Quietly. To someone who wants to build, not erase. And that's exactly what I did. 3 weeks later, the papers were signed, the title transferred, the bank account closed, the balance moved, clean, precise, final. The new owners were a young couple, teachers, first home. I handed them the keys myself. Didn't say much, but when they asked, "Did you build anything here?" I just smiled and said, "Yes." And I'm finally finished. That night I returned to the apartment, poured a glass of water, sat at the desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I began to write a letter, to Darren, not to punish, not to accuse, but to leave a line where the story ends. Darren, you were once the boy who held my hand at the train museum and said, "I want to build things like you, Dad." I believed you. And then you built something else. A future without me in it. I won't chase you. I won't beg. But I will leave this truth behind. I gave you everything. And when you took too much, I took back what mattered most. Myself. I folded the letter, sealed it, placed it on the windowsill. Not to send, just to let it breathe. The snow outside was falling again, quiet, steady, soft. And for the first time in a long while, I felt no need to explain myself. The silence they left me with, now it was mine. And I finally liked how it sounded. The apartment was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. There's a difference, you know. Empty is hollow, quiet is whole. And after all the noise of that Christmas, after the slammed doors and the frozen accounts and the stares from people who suddenly remembered who I was, quiet was the best gift I'd had in years. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time. No rush. I had nowhere to be. No one is calling my name. And I liked it that way. The apartment was small, 2 rooms, 1 window, hardwood floors that creaked when I turned too quickly. But the best part, the part that sold me, was the desk. Old oak, worn corners, a brass drawer pull shaped like a lion's head. Reminded me of the one Margaret had in her studio back when she still painted. I placed her lamp on the desk first. Then the photo. Just her. And Darren. He was 8, missing a front tooth. They were laughing about something I can't remember. That was the last picture we ever took on film. I didn't bring much with me from the house. Just the lamp, the photo, a wooden box with 3 items inside, my father's old pocket watch. The small drawing Darren made for me in first-grade stick figures, and a shaky caption that read, "Me and Dad build stuff." And the letter from Margaret, the one she wrote the week before the surgery, the one I didn't read until after she was gone. I opened it that night. Again. Arthur, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. But I need you to know something. You gave us everything. You built this life with your hands and your heart. And when I'm gone, I want you to build again. Not with bricks or plans, but with silence, with peace, with the quiet dignity that made me fall in love with you. I closed the letter, set it beside the lamp, and that's when I decided to write my own. Not for Margaret, not for Sienna, but for Darren. It wasn't a plea, or a rant, or a list of everything he'd done wrong. It was a mirror. Something he could look into now or years from now and see not just the man he betrayed, but the man who chose not to destroy him in return. I sat down, pen in hand, paper flat. The city glowed beyond the window, and I wrote, "Darren, there are things you will carry longer than money, heavier than regret, and more defining than success. One of those things is how you treated your father, and how he responded. You took from me. That's true. You lied. You plotted. You tried to erase me from a home I built for you. But I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I didn't strike back in anger. I showed you the truth. I let it breathe. I let others see it too. And I left. Because sometimes the loudest love is the one that lets go. I paused. Let the words settle. The ink is still glistening. Then I continued. I don't hate you, Darren, but I don't recognize you either. Not the man who sat across from me on Christmas Eve and told me I was no longer family. Not the husband who let his wife weaponize my age and my silence. Maybe one day you'll find the boy I once raised, the one who asked me to teach him how to build birdhouses, the one who held my hand at your mother's grave. And if you do, tell him I forgive him. I signed it, folded it carefully, slipped it into a plain envelope. No name, no address. I didn't mail it, didn't plan to, because it wasn't about sending, it was about saying. And I had finally said everything I needed to. That afternoon, I walked to the post office anyway, not to mail the letter, but to let it go. I slipped it into the donation box beside the entrance, letters to Santa and others in need. It would never be read, but it would no longer live in my drawer pulsing like an old wound. Let someone else carry its weight now. I was done. Over the next few weeks, life became simple. I started reading again, real books, not court documents or bank statements. I walked every morning to the cafe down the block, sat near the window, learned the names of the baristas. I helped the building super fix the elevator just once. Old habits. Sometimes I'd see families walking by, mothers with toddlers in puffy coats, couples holding coffee cups, a father holding a baby wrapped in wool. I didn't envy them. I didn't ache, because I wasn't missing anything. I was healing something. Darren never called again. Not after Christmas. Not after the papers were signed. Not after the house was sold. I assume they moved. Sienna probably found another house to repaint. Another narrative to write. I didn't check. The point of a clean break is not to look back. And yet, one afternoon I got a package. No return address. Brown paper. No markings. Inside was a photo. Framed. Simple. Familiar. It was the original drawing Darren had made when he was 6. The one I thought I'd lost. The same one that used to hang in my workshop until Sienna had it replaced with a canvas that cost $700 and said absolutely nothing. On the back of the frame, written in uneven block letters, just 2 words. Thank you. No signature. I didn't need one. I placed the photo on the shelf beside Margaret's, adjusted it so it faced the window. Then I sat back at the desk, turned on the lamp, watched the light spill across the oak surface like it always had. I had nothing left to give them, but I still had something to build. Not for them, for me. So I opened my journal, wrote 4 new words at the top of the page, a quiet man reclaimed, and I began again. It was a Thursday morning when I got the call. I wasn't expecting anything that day. The sky was the color of cold steel. I had just set my mug down, black coffee, no sugar, and turned on the desk lamp. The same way I started every morning now, with silence, with light. The phone buzzed once, then again, unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. "Mr. Grant," a woman's voice asked. "This is Dr. Rosenthal from St. Mary's Medical Center. Your son Darren Grant, he listed you as an emergency contact. He's been admitted following a car accident." My grip on the phone didn't tighten. My breath didn't hitch. I just closed my eyes. Because there it was. The thread is pulling again. I asked a few questions. Clear, calm, surgical. He was stable. No major head trauma. Broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, a concussion. He'd been alone in the car, hit black ice at an intersection near the interstate. No one else was hurt. "He regained consciousness and insisted we call you," she said. He seemed confused. Confused. That word again. Except this time no one was using it to describe me. I hung up the phone, stood at the window for a long time. Outside, people moved through the day as if nothing had happened. A woman dragged a toddler in a puffy blue coat across the sidewalk. The bakery truck unloaded its crates. 2 teenagers smoked behind the laundromat. The world kept spinning. But mine had slowed, not in panic, not in grief, just in recognition. I didn't go to the hospital, not immediately. Instead, I walked to the corner cafe and sat at my usual seat, the one near the window, ordered my usual black coffee, said good morning to Maria the barista like I always did. I didn't tell her about the call. I didn't tell anyone. Because I needed time to understand something. What does it mean to be needed again by someone who once threw you away? And more importantly, does being needed mean you have to go? I thought about that night, the night of the eviction notice, the folder, the silence that followed. I remembered Darren's face, how quickly the confidence drained from it, how his voice cracked when he said, "Dad, you can't do this." I remembered thinking, neither could you, but you did. He'd cut me out like an old carpet. And now, suddenly, I was the one person he wanted by his side in a hospital bed. No, that wasn't how this worked. I went home and sat at my desk, turned the lamp on, and took out my journal. The last page I'd written still read, "A quiet man reclaimed." I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote, "Sometimes the people who cast you out will ask you to return only when the roof starts leaking. But you are not a repairman. You are not an emergency fix for their poor foundations. You are a man, and you get to choose who you rescue." I waited 2 days. Then I called the hospital back. A nurse answered, kind voice, tired like someone who had seen too much humanity at its worst. I asked how he was doing. She paused. Well, she said, physically he's healing. Emotionally, I think he expected someone else to show up. I didn't respond. She continued. He kept asking for you, just once or twice. Then stopped. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark. Not mourning, not hardening, just breathing. A week passed. I sent no flowers, no letter, no visits. And it wasn't out of spite, it was clarity. Because I realized something that week, the version of love they sell you in Hallmark movies, the one where the prodigal son is forgiven because he's lying in a hospital bed with wires in his arms, doesn't work when the father has already bled dry. 2 weeks after the accident, I got a letter. Handwritten. Not from Darren. From Sienna. Again. But this time, it was different. It read, Arthur. He's not the same. Since the accident, I mean. He doesn't talk much. Doesn't argue. He just stares out the window. I don't know if you're waiting for him to apologize. I don't know if you even care anymore. But I do know this, he's broken. And part of me wonders if that's the version of him you always feared would emerge. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. That letter sat on my table for a full day. I didn't cry, didn't rage, I just stared at it, like he stared out that hospital window, because even now Sienna didn't understand. The version of him I feared was not the broken one. It was the one who could break others without blinking, and I had already met him. 2 more weeks passed. Spring was nudging its way into the city. The air was still cold, but the snow had thinned. Pigeons returned to the ledge outside my window. Kids were playing with chalk again, and still, no call. Not from Darren, not from anyone. And that was the moment I finally understood what Margaret meant. She wrote build again not with bricks or plans, but with silence, with peace. The silence now wasn't punishment, it was space. For me. So I wrote one final note, not to Darren, to myself. He didn't ask you to forgive. He didn't ask you to stay. He asked you to come when he was scared. And maybe that's enough for some men, but not for you. You are a man who has shown up his whole life, and now you get to show up for yourself. I lit a single candle that night, set it beside the lamp, drank 1 glass of wine, the same wine Margaret used to love. The kind with the blue label and the screw-top cap she always said was too cheap to be this good. And I whispered her name, not out of grief, not out of longing, but as a way of saying, I'm still here. I'm doing it. I'm building again. The next day I returned to the cafe. Maria saw me, smiled, and said, "You look lighter today." And I did, because I had survived the kind of storm most men don't speak of, the storm of being discarded. And I didn't crawl back. I stood still, let the storm pass. And now there was sky again. It started with a knock, not a call, not a letter. Just a soft knock on the door of my apartment just before dusk. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely did anymore. The hallway outside had the familiar scent of old linoleum and floor polish. When I opened the door, there stood a young woman, mid-30s, with kind eyes, a cardigan, a wedding ring too big for her finger, and a little boy hiding behind her leg. She smiled. "Mr. Grant?" she asked, a little unsure. "Arthur Grant." I nodded. She hesitated, then held up a small envelope. "My husband and I bought your house on Weatherby Lane." That stopped me. "I hope I'm not intruding," she continued quickly. We found something in the wall while we were redoing the closet in the guest room. Your name was on it. And, well, we thought you might want it back." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. My notebook, the one I used to keep in the study. The one with Margaret's recipes, and the early sketches Darren made when he was still dreaming about architecture. For a moment I just stared at it. It looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. I took it slowly, hands careful. "Thank you," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. "We didn't read anything," she added quickly. "We just thought, well, a house doesn't forget the people who built it. You probably wrote a lot in there." I nodded. I did. Before she turned to go, she paused. "I know this is probably strange," she said, "but would you like to see it again? The house?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I was shocked, but because somewhere deep down, I had always wondered what it would feel like to walk through that door again, not as a father fighting to be seen, but as a man who had already let it all go. I arrived 2 days later. Weatherby Lane hadn't changed. Same maple trees, same cracked sidewalk on the corner. But the house looked different. Not drastically, just lighter. The shutters were white now. The paint on the porch had been refreshed. The flower beds were trimmed. But the structure, the bones were still mine. Still Margaret's. Still home in a way only memory can recognize. The new owners, Emily and Josh, greeted me with warm smiles. Their son Tyler waved a crayon-stained hand from the living room. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and citrus, not rosemary and betrayal. That was gone now. I stepped into the foyer and paused. The spot where I'd once dropped my suitcase after Margaret's funeral now held a coat rack with a tiny red raincoat hanging from it. I looked left toward the dining room. Emily noticed. "We kept the table," she said quietly. "It was left in the garage. We refinished it. Didn't realize it was solid oak until Josh sanded it down." I smiled. Margaret would have liked that. She always said real wood doesn't complain. It just carries the weight. They gave me the space to walk. No one hovered. I moved through the room slowly, like visiting an old friend in hospice. The kitchen was brighter now. New backsplash, fresh tiles. But the layout was the same. The sink still looked out to the garden. The cabinet above it is still stuck slightly when opened. The guest room where they'd found the notebook had been painted soft blue. A rocking horse stood in the corner. Children's books lined the shelves. But the floorboard, the one with the loose panel, I saw it immediately. They had fixed it, but respectfully. I crouched down, tapped it once, and smiled. Back in the living room, Emily offered tea. I declined. I was holding the notebook with both hands, now flipping slowly through the pages. There it was, Margaret's peach cobbler recipe, Darren's drawing of a backyard treehouse, a photo taped in the back of the three of us standing on the roof during a spring cleanup. I ran a finger over the edge of that photo. The tape had browned. "This house," I said softly, "held us together longer than we deserved." Emily tilted her head. "That sounds sad." I shook my head. "No, that sounds honest." I thanked them again. Stood to leave. Josh walked me to the door. "Sir," he said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" I turned. "Were you the one who built the back porch extension? It's the most solid part of the whole house." We couldn't believe how level it was after all these years. I laughed quietly and warmly. "Yes, and my wife. She made me redo it 3 times until it was good enough to dance on," she said. Josh grinned. She was right. We've had dinners out there almost every weekend since spring. I nodded. Looked out toward the porch through the back windows. The late light caught the edge of the beams. "Good," I said. "It was meant for that." On the walk home, I didn't feel haunted. I didn't feel bitter. I felt returned. Not to the house, to the version of me that built it. With love, with hands, with purpose. Darren and Sienna had tried to erase me. But houses don't forget builders. Not when the beams were placed with care. Not when the walls once held the echo of lullabies. And now a new family had filled it with their sound. That was the justice I hadn't expected. Not revenge, but replacement. Of cold with warmth. Of deception with laughter. Of shadows with light. Back at the apartment, I placed the notebook on the desk beside the lamp. I opened to the back page and wrote a single sentence. "The house no longer remembers the betrayal. It remembers the music." I turned off the light, sat in the dark. But the dark no longer felt like erasure. It felt like rest. It was a Thursday when he showed up. I remember because it was the one day the park stayed quiet. No school groups, no dog walkers. Just old trees creaking above the walking path and the occasional jogger with more determination than rhythm. I always sat on the same bench, the one facing the duck pond, second from the left. Margaret loved it because it was shaded all year, even in winter. She said the branches above looked like stained glass without the color. I'd been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes when I saw him. Darren, my son. He approached with the careful steps of someone unsure if they were welcome. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had thinned more, and the blazer didn't fit quite right. His shoes were expensive, but they creased the wrong way, like he'd borrowed someone else's sense of self. He stopped 3 feet from the bench. "May I sit?" he asked, voice low. I didn't move, just gestured to the far side of the bench. Not next to me, just enough space for honesty to sit in between. He took the hint, and the seat. We sat like that for a while. 2 men sharing blood and silence. I let him be the one to break it. I heard you visited the house, he said. I nodded, said nothing. He cleared his throat. They told me you left something behind, a notebook or something. Still nothing from me. His hands fidgeted in his lap. Sienna said, you seemed at peace, that you even smiled. I turned my head slowly. You sent me divorce papers, Darren, I said flatly. On Christmas. He looked down. His lips tightened. You stood up at that table and erased me, in front of your wife, in front of people who once called me uncle, brother, friend. He didn't speak. I went on. You took my home, my savings, my dignity, and you did it with a raised glass. His voice came small. I thought you'd fight back. I turned fully toward him now. That was your mistake. He blinked. What do you mean I don't fight chaos with chaos? I don't yell in a house of liars. I leave it standing and remove myself. That's the difference between reaction and strategy, son. He flinched at that last word. Son, like hearing it aloud reminded him of who he used to be. He took a slow breath. Monica, she thought you'd contest everything. The will, the accounts, the transfer of title. I didn't need to. That puzzled him. I mean, I expected you to hire a lawyer to make a scene. We were ready for a lawsuit, and that would have given you what you wanted, my energy, my attention, my desperation. I shook my head. No. I gave you something worse. His brow furrowed. What's worse than losing everything? I looked at him, then really looked. The lines on his forehead, the tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his jaw like he'd been grinding his teeth in his sleep for months. And I said it quietly. I gave you silence. We let that settle. Wind rustled the trees. Ducks quacked in the distance. Darren looked at his hands, then in the sky, then finally at me. Was I ever a good son? That question. That useless, too late question. I didn't answer it directly. Instead I said, you were a child who loved drawing trees. You hated Brussels sprouts. You once cried when your goldfish died, and when you were 5 you told your mother you wanted to build a spaceship so she could visit heaven whenever she missed her dad. His eyes filled with something, shame maybe, or memory. That version of you, I said, was a good son, and I hope he visits you sometimes. He nodded slowly. Then, do you hate me? I let out a long breath. No. He looked surprised. But I don't admire you. He flinched. And that's worse, I added. Because hatred can be overcome, but the absence of respect, that's a void. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I want to make things right, he said. I didn't take it. What is it? A proposal. I bought a property in Vermont. I was thinking maybe we could start a project together. You always liked carpentry. Maybe we can rebuild something from scratch. I stared at the paper, then at him. You think you can fix with a business plan what you broke in the soul? He froze. It's not about profit, he muttered. It's time. I want to spend time. I smiled sadly. And what happens when Monica finds out? He looked away. That's what I thought. I stood up. You came here to relieve your guilt, not to carry responsibility. That's the difference between a visit and a return. He stood too. Dad. I turned my head sharply. No, don't say that if you don't mean it. He swallowed hard, then said almost pleading, Arthur. I paused. That was the first time he'd called me by my name since he was 12, and angry I took away his Game Boy. Arthur, he said again. If I said I was sorry, would you believe me? I looked at the pond, then at the spot where Margaret once spilled tea while laughing too hard, then at the place where Darren skinned his knee running downhill. No, I said quietly, but I'd believe you meant it in the moment. And that's something. We stood there, 2 men, a bench, a memory between them. He stepped forward like he might hug me. I stepped back. No, I said. Not yet. He nodded, didn't fight it, didn't ask when yet might be. Then he turned and walked away. Not fast, not ashamed, just quieter. I sat back down on the bench, let the world return to stillness. I took out a pen from my coat pocket, opened the back of Margaret's old notebook, and wrote, "Some people knock to apologize. Others knock to see if the door is still locked." Either way, I didn't answer. 3 weeks after the park bench. 3 weeks after Darren walked away lighter maybe, but still uncertain whether that weight would return. I sat in a walnut-paneled room that smelled like dry ink and old leather. Across from me was Victor Delaney, retired judge, longtime friend, and the only man I trusted with secrets that weren't supposed to see daylight. He poured the tea himself. "Chamomile," he said. "You always liked the bitter ones." I smirked. "I've acquired a taste for it, yes." He set the cup down and slid a folder across the desk. "Everything's ready. The trust has matured. The forensic audit is complete. And the back-channel buyer finalized." I opened the folder. Inside crisp documents, each one quiet as snow, but as sharp as razors. The original deed transfer. Darren thought he'd locked in voided by a clause he didn't read because Monica had rushed him through it. The 401k withdrawal, frozen due to the fraud flag I planted, legally. And the most poetic part, the house. The one he thought was finally his. The same house I had left voluntarily. Victor pointed to the last page. "Signed this morning. You're officially leasing it. To the Historical Preservation Board. For 25 years. I chuckled. "He'll scream." Victor grinned. "Let him. He'll be screaming from the guest room of a rental." It hadn't been rage that fueled me. It had been arithmetic. While Darren and Monica flaunted their newfound ownership, I had quietly opened new accounts, met with lawyers under aliases, moved assets not out of spite, but into the shadow. I hired an estate accountant who specialized in asset recovery after elder abuse. I told her plainly, I'm not trying to ruin them. I'm trying to reveal them. She nodded and said, "Then we'll use transparency as your sword." It started with the insurance policies. Darren had switched the beneficiary on one of mine without my knowledge. A common trick but illegal if done through coercion. I let it sit, let him believe he'd succeeded, until I requested a copy of the voice authorization recording from the company. He hadn't faked my voice, but he had pressured me subtly over speakerphone. That call had been recorded. And it had been enough. Next was the real estate shuffle. The second home in Montana, Monica tried to sell it. But she didn't know it was held in a special purpose LLC, one that required dual approval. And the second signer, Margaret. Yes, even after death, her name carried legal weight. I had placed her as the co-trustee of that specific asset, which meant Monica had committed attempted fraud. Victor leaned back. "They thought you had gone soft." I nodded. They confused restraint with surrender. He paused. "You sure you want to go through with this last part?" I looked at the final document on the desk, the one Darren and Monica didn't see coming, a notarized letter to the IRS, triggering an audit, not to punish, but to clarify, because the gifts they claimed from me had been categorized as non-taxable family contributions. But now they'd be reclassified as misappropriated assets, and the amount over $420,000. Victor tapped the file. They'll owe more than they've ever earned. I took a long sip of tea, and they'll pay, in payments, while staring at a house that no longer belongs to them. A week later, the first cracks began. Darren called. I let it go to voicemail. The next day, an email, "Dad, we need to talk." Then another, "I think there's been a misunderstanding with the deed paperwork." Then finally, Monica's freaking out. "I didn't know about the IRS. Can we please meet?" I responded only once. A short email. Subject line, clarity. Body. Everything that's happening is legal. Everything that's happening is fair. And everything that's happening is happening because I finally chose silence over sacrifice. I loved you more than you ever deserved, and I forgive you. But forgiveness is not a door. It's a boundary. Arthur Victor said I could sue them. Said we had enough for a civil case. But I declined. No headlines. No spectacle. Just systems. Let the quiet hand of consequence take over. Monica moved out first. Her family didn't approve of being audited. Then Darren took a leave of absence from work. I heard he tried to cash in a pension early. Denied. Flagged. Investigated. It was never revenge. It was rebalancing. letting the weight of their choices tip the scale without me ever needing to touch it. One day, months later, I walked by my old house. It had been restored now. The preservation board had added a plaque to the fence, Grant Home Est. 1978. I stood there for a moment. A neighbor walked by. "You the man who built this place?" she asked. I nodded. "Beautiful bones," she said. I smiled. "Built to last," I replied. Then I turned and walked away, not because I was erased, but because I had become something stronger than a name on a deed. I had become undeniable. I never moved back into the house, even after Darren and Monica packed their things, even after the final notice from the IRS arrived in their mailbox, even after the last vestige of their entitlement cracked and fell like plaster from a water-damaged ceiling. I didn't return. I kept my small apartment above the bookstore. 3 rooms, 1 for sleeping, 1 for reading, 1 for nothing at all. The quietest room in the house. There's a kind of peace that doesn't arrive until every noise has been stripped from your life, noise in the form of expectation, noise in the form of roles you've been forced to play for too long. Father, provider, peacemaker. I am none of those now. I am simply Arthur Grant, a man who once allowed betrayal to bloom beneath his roof, a man who once believed that love given long enough could become a contract. I was wrong. The mailbox filled up for a while. Letters from Darren, some angry, some desperate. One simply said, "I miss you." I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood that silence is not always the absence of love. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can give someone who needs to sit in the stillness of their own choices. Victor visited one afternoon. We sat on the back porch of the bookstore, the sun bleeding through the last of winter's chill. "You ever think of leaving the city?" he asked. I shook my head. "No need. You're not lonely." I looked around, at the trees, the pages, the sky. "No," I said. "For the first time I'm in good company." He smiled, left a bottle of whiskey on the porch rail, said nothing else. That's the kind of friend Victor is. He knows when the story is done and when it just needs a period, not applause. I spent more time at the library, volunteering, cataloging, fixing what was broken. There was an old boy who came in every Thursday whose name was Eli. 11, quiet, carried around a backpack that looked heavier than he did. One day he sat next to me and asked, "Why do people lie?" I looked up. He wasn't reading, just holding a book upside down. I said, "Because they're afraid of losing something." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "I wish my dad wasn't afraid of me." That night I walked home and cried, not because of Darren, not anymore, but because somewhere in this world, another boy was growing up learning that betrayal can look like silence, and hoping someone would tell him otherwise. Weeks passed, then months, then a letter arrived, not from Darren, from Monica, typed, formal, cold. Per our understanding, I am requesting the return of personal items left in the Grant residence. I didn't respond. Instead, I mailed the key to the preservation board. Let them handle it. Some things no longer belong to me, not even as memories. And then one day, I got a call. From Lily, Darren's daughter, my granddaughter. She was 19 now, in college. Soft voice, a little shaky. "Grandpa, are you still mad?" I didn't know how to answer, but I told her the truth. "I'm not mad, Lily. I'm just awake." She asked if we could meet, so we did. A cafe near the river. She wore a navy coat 2 sizes too big, probably thrifted. She had her mother's cheekbones, but not her eyes. Her eyes were Margaret's. We didn't talk about Darren. We talked about books, about her classes, about how she used to remember my voice reading bedtime stories from the hallway. I asked her, "Why now?" She stirred her tea. "Because I found something Mom threw away. A card. From you. Years ago." I blinked. What did it say? She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a yellowing note. folded, faded, but still intact. She read aloud. When people fail, you remember you are still whole. You were never their missing piece to begin with. She looked at me, eyes full. I think I'm ready to stop being angry at people who forgot how to love. I smiled. You just made your grandfather very proud. We didn't rebuild what had been broken with Darren. We didn't pretend. That's the thing about real healing. It doesn't need declarations, just choices. Lily came to visit every Sunday after that. Sometimes she brought a book, sometimes cookies. Once she brought a photo of Margaret holding her as a baby. Tell me what she was like, she said. So I did. We sat for hours, me reweaving the threads of a legacy someone else tried to unravel. The last time Darren called, I answered. Not because I owed him, but because I had forgiven him so long ago, it no longer cost me anything. His voice was thin, weary. I lost everything. I said no. You lost what you took, what wasn't yours to begin with. He went quiet. Then he said, I just wanted to be seen. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. And you were. You just didn't like the reflection. He asked, is it too late? I didn't answer that. Instead, I said, be good to your daughter. It's the only thing that matters now. He hung up. That was the last time I heard from him. I don't know what kind of story people will tell about me when I'm gone. Maybe the man who fought back. Maybe the old fool who waited too long. Maybe just a man who finally remembered who he was. I don't need the house back. I don't need the title. I don't even need an apology. What I needed was to reclaim my voice. And I did. Not with shouting, but with a whisper that said, enough. Christmas came again. No rosemary lamb, just 2 mugs of hot cider, and Lily watching the snow fall from the window of the bookstore. Do you ever miss it? She asked. What? The big house, the parties, the noise. I looked at her, at the peace in her eyes, at the legacy she was choosing to inherit, not through blood, but through presence. No, I said. I have everything I need right here. And in the quietest room of my life, I finally heard it. Not revenge, not regret, but the sound of peace. And it was louder than anything Darren had ever screamed. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.